Let's stay in Canberra now and catch up with the former Resources Minister, Matt Canavan. You saw what he did in Senate estimates yesterday in my editorial at the top of the program. He joins us now live. Matt Canavan, you must have been, well, delighted to see all that revealed in front of estimates, but just perturbed that a crucial fact like that, the fact that they don't have any studies particularly making this link between bushfire weather and climate change in Australia, it's astonishing that this wouldn't make it into their fact sheet.
Absolutely, Chris. It's a fact I've known for a little while, because after the bushfires and the commentary about it, I did a lot of reading on it and decided, well, I'll get up to speed on what the science is, and I've read a lot of scientific papers on it and also the CSIRO reports. So I knew that there was a very simple sentence in a CSIRO document, jointly authored with the Bureau of Meteorology, that there are no studies linking climate change to bushfires at this time. And so when the Labor Party actually tabled the two-page explainer document that the CSIRO put out last month, and when I had a read of that, it had a section on climate change and science, but failed to point out that very pertinent fact. Now, when you might have seen, then I'm not sure what you played, but the CSIRO tried to say it was a high-level document, but that sentence about no studies linking climate change and bushfires is a pretty high-level statement in my regard, pretty easy to put in. That wasn't in, and then when I asked, is it still the position of CSIRO? Well, they took a while, about 10 seconds, which is a long time to wait in Senate estimates, but eventually they confirmed that there are still no studies linking climate change and bushfires.
See, this is deeply worrying. Like you, I've done a lot of reading in this area as well, and I'm very interested in climate science. Even though the left will always scream denier, I accept the science. I'm just interested in all the various aspects of the science. And there are international peer-reviewed documents that make the same point, that while they expect climate change will have a bad effect on bushfire conditions in Australia, they say that the data just isn't there at the moment because of they just don't have the long-term trends. And even though they expect to find that, they say it's another couple of decades before they can say that for sure. So why can't scientists just be honest with the public? Do they not trust people with the facts?
Well, I fear, Chris, that our scientists face the same pressures that we do in this place, and I know, talking to my colleagues, there's sometimes a reticence to step outside the approved orthodoxy here, and perhaps we just need to re-establish and rekindle the benefits of unorthodoxy in this place. Sometimes it's important in the political debate, especially, to welcome and encourage views that may be a bit different from the mainstream, because they challenge you, they improve debate. And they help us all lead to better policy conclusions. But there's a lot of pressure in this space, as you know, to not even introduce any kind of uncertainty or complexity. It's just got to be all one way, that climate change is bad, that it obviously leads to everything. We haven't seen too many links to coronavirus yet, but I'm sure that's coming. Everything is a cause of climate change, and you just don't. It doesn't create any space, unfortunately, for other points of view. And I think scientists sometimes feel that pressure too, and so they're somewhat reticent to put the more complex picture into papers like this.
Well, they certainly do feel the pressure, because Professor Andy Pittman, who's one of the most renowned climate scientists in Australia, certainly no climate sceptic, when he was quoted by my colleague Andrew Bolt, and then others like myself have also run his comments where he says there's no link between climate science and the drought. They haven't been able to establish a clear link between drought conditions in Australia now and climate science. Again, they need more time to develop that. They're not ruling it out. They're saying that could be the case over time, but there's no direct link now. When attention was drawn to that by people who are sceptical or interested in these issues, of course so much pressure came on him that he had to revise his statement. But all he did was add a line, saying that instead of saying there's no link between climate change and the drought, he said there's no direct link between climate change and the drought. And that was enough, of course, for the ABC and all sorts of others to pretend he'd said something entirely different.
Well, it's a concern to me, Chris, that what's happened in the last decade on this debate is because the temperature models haven't quite been borne out in the real world, so the predictions that were made about temperature increases for a given level of carbon dioxide emission increases haven't been borne out as feared. The temperature increase has been lower than expected in those models. There have been increases, but they've been lower. those seeking climate change action here have tried to turn the debate to extreme weather events. So you've seen that. It started as global warming, then it was climate change, and now it's extreme weather. And the problem with extreme weather, as you've alluded to, is they're rare events, so they're hard to establish statistically significant relationships to. And so for the science is very unclear on all of these points. But of course, for human beings, when you see an extreme event, people want an explanation. There's a heuristic response that people want to know, well, why was that created? And it's very easy to blame climate change, and that becomes the orthodoxy, as I said, that can't be challenged, yet it leads to some very, very poor policy decisions. In this case, the worst being that there's somewhat ignorance of the need to reduce our fuel loads, to reduce fire risk, because everybody apparently is saying if we just shut down coal-fired power stations, there won't be any bushfires in Australia anymore. I mean, it is absurd, but it gets somehow established as gospel here in this place.
Well, it is absurd, and it's a tragedy, really, the way some media just play into that game. They have no curiosity at all and put forward propositions that are absurd. As you say, whatever we're doing with the climate policy in this country can have no effect on our bushfire seasons. We have always had bad bushfire seasons. They will always be bad. Under climate change scenarios, they could get worse. But I tell you what, Australia's policies aren't going to change that. I do want to move on, I suppose, to the next step of climate policy, and that is what we do with energy. And you've obviously been welcoming of the development, or at least consideration, of nuclear energy as a fuel in this country. It's been fascinating to see your Nationals colleague in New South Wales, the Deputy Premier John Barilaro, support this. But of course, his own government, run by the Liberal Premier Gladys Berejiklian, doesn't support it. This is going to be a new fracture point in coalition politics, isn't it?
Well, look, I think it's important that the Nationals Party puts its own perspective on these issues, and we're not afraid to do so. Obviously, the Liberal Party can decide its own position, but I think there's a growing consensus to at least consider nuclear power for the long-term needs of Australia. And I do stress long-term. I mean, in the short term, my main focus in the energy system is to try to bring power bills down. Now, a nuclear power station won't do that for two reasons. One, it will take a number of years to build, possibly even decades. And two, at current costs, they tend to be even higher than our high electricity costs at the moment. So I think we need to have something in between, but long term, absolutely nuclear should be considered. It does require a level of political support, which we don't have in the community yet, so that needs to be worked on. But that only improves if you have people out there making the case for it, and that's what my Nationals colleagues are doing.
You've got to talk about it, and of course it always bears repeating that the late great Labor Prime Minister Bob Hawke was a very strong advocate for this particular development in the latter years of his life.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think anyone that's outside the political realm sees that if you want to get to reduce carbon emissions or anywhere near going towards net zero emissions, nuclear power does start to make sense at that point, because then the costs start to get at $150 a megawatt hour or so for nuclear, start to get cheaper than just shutting down industry. So that's where, I mean, the common sense is. Obviously, the political problem is one that is real. I was responsible as Minister for Resources to try and find a location for the nuclear waste we produce from Lucas Heights, which is a nuclear reactor we have 30 minutes from the middle of Sydney. It produces nuclear medicines, not power. But we've been trying for 40 years to find a site for that. Now, we got a town to vote for it, 62% in favour. We just haven't built it yet. There's still a process to go. But that's a positive step. But it is hard. It is hard. You can't underestimate the difficulty of getting communities to sign up to this stuff, deal with the waste, and make it something that's accepted broadly in the Australian political community.
Just finally, Senator Matt Canavan, you've been a minister for a while. Normally that means you end up in various inquiries and press conferences fielding all the questions and attacks. It must have been good fun to be a backbencher again and get onto Senate estimates and pose a few questions.
Well, Chris, I just feel I'm really honoured to be a senator for Queensland. It's an amazing privilege to be in this role, and yep, so I didn't plan to have not be in the ministry a few weeks ago or a month or so ago, but those things happen in life, and other opportunities, other doors open. So that's what I'm getting on with doing. I'm particularly passionate about making sure we keep our industry and manufacturing industries in this country, and the worst thing we could do for them, for those Australians that rely on our factories for their jobs, for their livelihoods. The worst thing we could do for them is to sign up to glib, ill-thought-through climate change policies like the Labor Party has done with net zero emissions, because that would be signing a suicide note for our manufacturing sector in this country. So I'm taking up those fights and got plenty to do.
Matt Canavan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good one, mate.